Her and her roommate cornered me. The words replay in my head, a slow drum I can't ignore. Choose one of us, or take us both. I'm not even sure I understood what she meant the first time, standing there in the dim corner of the bookstore with her coffee cup warming her hands, her roommate hovering beside her with that sly, teasing grin. I just froze. It smells faintly of old paper and polish in this place. The sunlight cuts in through dusty blinds, falling in stripes across the wooden floor, and somehow it feels like it's highlighting every heartbeat I didn't know I was having. She's leaning against the counter, arms crossed loosely, but the way she tilts her head, like she's trying to measure exactly how much of me is paying attention, is something I can't shake. Her dark hair catches the light in coppery glints, and her eyes, they're sharper than they should be, almost accusing, almost laughing. I'm fumbling with a stack of books I've been trying to shelve all morning. My fingers feel clumsy, like they don't belong to me, and I can't stop noticing the little crease in her sleeve where she tucked her watch, or the way her roommate's elbow brushes hers casually, as if to say, "Look at him, he's mine to tease." She doesn't say anything at first, just watches, the faintest curve of a smile tugging at one corner of her lips. And somehow, that silence, her silence, makes me want to speak. But the words hang in my throat, caught somewhere between what's polite and what's impossible. Then, like a small lifeline thrown across the space between us, she leans forward, her hand brushing mine as she reaches for a book at the edge of the counter. It's nothing, a fleeting contact that should have felt inconsequential, but it jolted me. My skin buzzed, my stomach twisted. I catch myself staring at her hand, at the light catching the gold band on her finger, at the subtle strength in her fingers as they curl around the edge of the book. And just like that, I feel like I'm trespassing in a room I didn't know existed. Her roommate snickers softly, breaking the tension, but she stays there, her gaze lingering on me a beat too long. Not mocking, not cruel, just there. And I feel it, the faintest pull in my chest, like gravity suddenly decided I was worth noticing. She straightens, pushes the book toward me as if it were a gift I wasn't sure I deserved, and for a moment I think she's going to say something clever, something that would make this moment less fragile. But she doesn't. She just lets her eyes meet mine again, steady and unflinching, before turning back to reorganize the shelves as though nothing happened. I blink and the moment dissolves, leaving me fumbling with the book in my hands, heart racing like I've just crossed an invisible line. I can't stop thinking about the warmth of her hand brushing mine, the slight tilt of her head, the way she carries herself like she's been everywhere, seen everything, and still noticed me. It's been a few days since the bookstore moment, and somehow I keep finding reasons to be here again. Today she's reorganizing a corner near the back where the lighting is dim, and I'm stacking new arrivals that don't seem to belong anywhere. She notices me immediately, but only with the faintest tilt of her head, the way someone notices a shadow but doesn't name it. "Careful with those," she murmurs, voice low, almost distracted. Her words are polite, but the edge in them is like she's testing me, or maybe herself. I nod, fumbling to place a hardcover without knocking over a stack. We work side by side, quiet except for the shuffle of books and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. I can't help noticing her hands. They're steady, sure, but the knuckles are tight, like she's holding back more than just the books. Every now and then she brushes a stray strand of hair from her face, and I catch the hint of tiredness under her eyes, the faint curve of strain in her jaw. She's trying not to show it, but she's human, and I see it. I make a joke about a misfiled book, something small and silly, and for a fraction of a second, her lips twitch. Not a full laugh, just enough to let me know she could if she wanted. Then it's gone, replaced by her usual calm, guarded air. I almost want to reach out, ask what's behind it, but I don't. She doesn't need me to pry, and I'm not sure I could handle the answer anyway. At one point, she leans against the shelf to grab a book high above her head, and I step forward instinctively to steady her. She freezes for a heartbeat, hand barely brushing mine, and I swear time stretches. There's a hesitation in her, a flicker of vulnerability I'm not supposed to see. She pulls away, but not sharply, just enough to remind me she's in control, always. The room smells faintly of dust and coffee, the quiet interrupted by the soft thump of a book landing in a crate. I glance at her, and she meets my eyes for a second longer than necessary. There's something unspoken there, something that makes my chest tighten, like she's letting me glimpse a corner of herself she doesn't usually share. She laughs softly at something her roommate mutters from across the room, and it's effortless, unexpected, and it makes me want to hear it again. I notice the way her shoulders ease just a little, how her fingers linger on a book as if it's a fragile thing, like she's holding herself together in layers I can't reach. As I step back to give her space, she glances up and meets my eyes. The air between us is almost heavy, charged without a word being said. And just like that, she moves on, straightening the shelf, but I'm left staring at the space she occupied, feeling the echo of the warmth she left behind. I know I shouldn't be thinking about her like this. I know it's too soon, maybe impossible. But in that quiet, half-lit corner, watching her just exist, I feel a gentle pull I can't fight, like she's a gravity I've just discovered, and I'm already falling. The storm hit just as I was shelving the last of the new arrivals, drumming on the windows like it wanted to punctuate everything unsaid. She was still there, crouched by the lower shelves, sorting a pile of magazines, and the fluorescent light made the wet streaks on her hair shimmer faintly. I wanted to tell her something. Anything. But the words felt heavy, too sharp for the quiet between us. "Do you always stay this late?" I asked, almost casual, almost safe. She glanced up, the faintest crease between her brows. "Sometimes," she said. That was all. No invitation, no rebuke. Just her. I felt like I was trespassing in a room she'd let no one else enter. I stepped closer to help her lift a stack, and the brief touch of our hands sent a jolt up my arm I didn't expect. She didn't flinch, but she didn't linger either. Just that subtle pause, the microsecond where our proximity registered something neither of us named. My chest tightened. I wanted to linger, wanted to lean closer, but I stopped myself. Her phone buzzed on the counter. I noticed her fingers hesitate before picking it up. She swore under her breath when she saw the name flashing on the screen. Her ex. I didn't hear the words, just the sharp intake of breath and the tiny tremor in her hand. I wanted to ask, wanted to reach for her, but I didn't. She handled it, whispered a brief, curt reply, and set the phone down as if nothing happened. The space between us tightened, stretched with unsaid things. We moved on to restocking a shelf in tandem, close enough that our shoulders brushed once, twice. Each contact felt weighted, like an unspoken question hung between us. I could smell the faint perfume she wore, the quiet warmth radiating from her, and I wanted to lean into it, to close the gap that shouldn't exist. She paused mid-shelf, looking at me with something like hesitation, something I almost, but not quite, understood. I opened my mouth to say, "I'm glad you're here," but the words died before they left my lips. My hands hovered over the books, unsure, awkward, painfully aware of how close we were. Her gaze flicked toward the door, then back at me. There was a softness in it, fleeting, gone before I could catch it. My stomach twisted. I wanted to reach for her, wanted to brush a stray hair from her face, maybe even touch her arm, but something held me back. Rules, timing, propriety, or just the fear of breaking whatever fragile equilibrium existed between us. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the gap between us for a heartbeat. Our eyes met, lingered. My hand twitched, like it wanted to bridge the distance, to reach into the space we'd been skirting for days. But I didn't. She didn't. And then the storm rolled on, indifferent, and she straightened, moving to another shelf. The moment passed, but the residue of it, the unspoken, the nearly there touch, burned in my chest. I couldn't stop replaying it. The flicker of vulnerability, the way her eyes held mine just a heartbeat too long. I stepped back, pretending to organize books, but my pulse refused to settle. I wanted that almost action to become something real, to break the invisible barrier, yet I didn't. Not tonight. Not yet. And as the rain hammered against the windows, I knew I would think about that brief closeness for days. That almost moment. We were stacking boxes in the back room, the faint hum of the heater filling the spaces between us. It was quiet, too quiet, like the air itself was waiting for someone to say what neither of us had dared speak. I wanted to break it. I didn't know how, so I just watched her, tracing the way her fingers brushed the edges of the cardboard, the way her shoulders stiffened when I moved too close. Finally, she sighed, a sound that wasn't exactly frustration, more like a release she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Do you ever wonder what this is?" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it landed in my chest like a stone. I froze, caught in the weight of the question. Sometimes, I admitted, careful, because even saying it aloud felt dangerous. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was trying to decide if I was an ally or a trespasser in this strange space we'd created. Because it's not normal, she murmured. Her lips pressed together for a moment. Then she shook her head, as if to clear it. We can't pretend it's just coincidence. I wanted to reach for her, to say something that might make it less confusing, less charged. But my hands stayed at my sides, like they knew that some barriers couldn't be crossed with touch alone. Instead, I swallowed hard and let the silence stretch. I could feel her watching me, the careful way she shifted her weight, the almost imperceptible tremor in her fingers. We stood there, side by side, the boxes between us, the space suddenly electric. I noticed how tired her eyes looked, how the corners of her mouth quivered just slightly when she tried to smile. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that it wasn't her fault, that I understood this too, but the words lodged in my throat. I don't even know what I'm feeling, she said finally, voice breaking in a way that made me want to crawl across the room just to hold her, not in desire, but in solidarity. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together like she was trying to contain something that might spill if she didn't. The heater clicked off, and the room fell colder, quieter, our breaths suddenly loud in the stillness. I could see the faint sheen of moisture at the corners of her eyes, and I hated that I had no map for this. No instructions for how to navigate a person so impossible to read and yet impossible to ignore. I don't want to hurt anyone, she whispered, almost to herself. And yet, I feel like I already have. Her words lingered, heavy and jagged, filling the space between us. I wanted to respond with reassurance, but even that felt hollow, too small for what we were standing in. So I stayed silent, letting the gravity of her honesty settle. She finally turned away, stacking the last box with slow, deliberate movements. I watched her back, the line of her neck under her hair, the curve of her shoulders, and I realized something terrifying. We could never go back to pretending this was normal. Whatever this was, confusing, frightening, fragile, it had changed the room, the air, and both of us. And as she straightened, meeting my eyes for just a brief second before looking away, she whispered something I'll never forget. I don't know how to stop feeling this. I was shelving a pile of journals when I noticed her staring at one of the framed photographs on the wall near the checkout counter. I hadn't paid much attention to the photos before, just landscapes, book covers, a few old snapshots, but this one made her pause. Her hand hovered over it, fingers trembling slightly, though she quickly tucked them behind her back. Is that him? I asked, keeping my voice low. My chest tightened at the flicker of something raw in her expression. She swallowed, nodded, then shook her head as if she wanted to deny it. It's been a long time, she murmured, voice brittle. I didn't think anyone would notice. I stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. I notice a lot about you, I said quietly, and she gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, not the confident one I knew, but one that felt fragile, like glass. She turned away, pacing slightly, fingers brushing over the bookshelves as if she could steady herself against the weight of her own memories. He left, she said finally, barely audible. Not in a dramatic way, just gone. And somehow I was left trying to hold on to pieces that didn't fit anymore. I wanted to say something, to fill the silence, but the words felt clumsy, like they could never match the soft ache in her voice. So I just stayed there, letting her speak, letting her grief unfold without interruption. Her eyes flicked to me then, sharp and searching. You remind me of him, in the strangest way, she said. My stomach twisted at the confession. Not a confession of love, but a crack in her armor, something she'd been holding tight for years. It wasn't about me, but somehow it felt like it was. I reached for a journal on the nearby shelf, my fingers brushing hers as I handed it over. The contact was fleeting, but I felt it, a quiet surge beneath the surface. She hesitated, then accepted it, fingers lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary. You shouldn't, she began, but stopped herself. Her eyes darted to the photo again, then back at me, searching for something she couldn't name. I didn't speak, because silence felt safer than words. The air between us shifted, subtle and seismic all at once. I could see it in her posture, the way she unconsciously leaned slightly toward me, and yet held herself back. The tension wasn't romantic, exactly. But it was intimate in the way that only human truth can be, a shared recognition of pain, a mutual understanding without pretense. I never wanted to remember, she said finally, voice trembling. And yet seeing it now, I feel like I have to. She paused, swallowing hard, and I realized she wasn't talking about the photograph. She was talking about the weight she'd carried alone, the stories she'd never shared. I wanted to reach for her hand, but instead I just stood there, letting the moment stretch. No words, no gestures, just the quiet hum of the bookstore and the electricity of her honesty lingering between us. She exhaled slowly, almost like a confession to herself more than to me, and for a brief moment her eyes softened in a way that made my chest ache. I think I needed someone to notice, she whispered, barely audible, and the weight of that simple truth hit me harder than any confession of love ever could. It was late. The bookstore was empty now, the bell above the door silent for hours, and the soft hum of the heater felt like the only witness to what was happening between us. She was perched on the edge of a low shelf, knees drawn up, sorting through a stack of old letters she'd found tucked behind some books. I sat beside her on the floor, close enough that our shoulders brushed, close enough that the heat from her jacket seeped into mine. Neither of us said much. We didn't have to. The quiet carried everything. The memories, the admissions, the cracks we'd both been holding together for weeks. I watched her fingers tremble slightly as she sifted through the papers, the dim light catching the faint lines around her eyes, the faint weariness she tried to hide. I never realized how much I held back, she murmured finally, voice soft, almost ashamed. She looked at me then, not with accusation or expectation, just with the weight of truth laid bare. Maybe I was afraid someone would notice. Or maybe that no one could. I reached out, instinctively, my fingers brushing the back of her hand. She flinched for a heartbeat, just enough to remind me this wasn't simple, this wasn't easy, but then she stayed. Let me stay? And in that stillness, the years of separation, fear, and restraint collapsed into a single, quiet acknowledgement. We'd been circling the same orbit, waiting for permission we didn't need. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She exhaled, a soft, unsteady sound, and I felt her lean just slightly toward me. Not in surrender, not in declaration, but in trust. That's all either of us needed. Trust. A shared space where we didn't have to perform or explain or fix anything. Her hand shifted, brushing against mine deliberately this time, and I held it. Not a gesture of possession, not a gesture of promise, just the simplest affirmation that we were here, now, together. The world outside the walls of the bookstore could wait. We sat like that for what felt like hours, sorting through old letters, exchanging glances, and letting the quiet fill the gaps words could never reach. I could see her breathing ease, her posture relax, the faintest curve at the corners of her mouth that told me she wasn't guarding herself quite so tightly anymore. There was no confession, no dramatic admission. Love wasn't shouted here. It was in the gentle leaning, the deliberate closeness, the shared silence. It was in the way our hands touched and stayed, in the way our eyes met without questions, without hesitation. It was earned, fragile, and real. Finally, she rested her forehead against the side of my temple, just for a moment. A small gesture, so intimate it almost didn't exist. But it said everything: acknowledgement, understanding, acceptance. We didn't have to define it. We didn't have to name it. And in that quiet corner, surrounded by the scent of old paper and the dim, forgiving light, I realized we didn't need more than this. Not yet, maybe not ever. Because sometimes, love doesn't need fireworks or declarations. Sometimes, it just needs to be recognized, held, and allowed to exist. I squeezed her hand gently, and she tightened hers in response. That was enough. I keep coming back to that night, though it's months behind us now. The bookstore smells the same, faintly of dust, coffee, and varnish, but everything feels different. I feel different. She feels different. And somehow, so does the space between us. We don't talk about labels or timelines or what this means in the eyes of anyone else. We just exist in the quiet understanding we earn together. I notice how she moves, lighter now, shoulders no longer tense with unspoken weight. I notice how I can stay close without fear, how I can watch her laugh fully, let her notice me without hesitation, and not feel like I'm trespassing. Sometimes I catch her staring at me from across the room, Not with accusation, not with testing, but with recognition. And I realized that recognition, the act of being truly seen, is a kind of love on its own. It's enough. It's everything. We've learned patience, the kind that doesn't rush into declarations or demand explanations. We've learned that trust can be slow, but once it's built, it holds stronger than any sudden confession. And I've learned to notice the small things, the way her hands curl around a cup, the faint crease in her forehead when she's thinking, the warmth in her eyes when she finally lets herself soften. It hasn't been perfect. There were moments of hesitation, awkwardness, almost steps we didn't take. And yet, those moments, the restraint, the pauses, the tiny vulnerabilities, made this more real than anything I could have imagined. I catch her hand brushing mine as we close up for the night, and I don't overthink it. We just let it linger. I feel the quiet pulse of shared understanding, and for the first time in a long time, I know that some things don't need words to be felt. The world outside continues, noisy and impatient, but inside this small, dimly lit bookstore, the chaos fades. She smiles at me, faint but honest, and I realize that love doesn't always arrive in a storm. Sometimes it seeps in slowly, like sunlight through blinds, warm and patient, until you're bathed in it without realizing. And when I leave that night, I carry her in the spaces I can't touch, in the quiet of a street corner, in the hum of a heater, in the brush of fingers that stayed held just a little too long. It's subtle, it's imperfect, and it's entirely ours. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?